welcome. My name is Suzanne Pollack. I'm the development director for the Charleston Literary Festival and the party planner. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming today and having the courage to explore a difficult but important book, Sandy Hook, An American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth. Thank you to sponsors Jerry and Walter Federowitz. Walter is the president of the festival, and without Walter and Jerry as his wife and partner, the festival would not be here. Thank you, Walter. Early in her career, Elizabeth Williamson worked for the Washington Post, writing about Hurricane Katrina, the war in Iraq, lobbying, government contracting, the White House, and Congress. Subsequently, she became the Wall Street Journal's Warsaw bureau chief, covering Poland and surrounding countries. During President Obama's first term, Elizabeth covered the White House for the Wall Street Journal's Washington bureau, often writing about national politics and the culture of Washington. Elizabeth is now a feature writer in the New York Times Washington bureau. She is a former member of the New York Times editorial board, and she's awesome. Elizabeth's interlocutor today is one of my favorite people of all time, and I know many of you in the audience feel the very same way. Autumn Phillips is a limitless adventurer. She makes every moment count. She asks the most piercing questions of anyone I have ever met. She inspires everyone who has the honor to know her. Autumn is the executive editor of the Post and Courier, the Pulitzer Prize-winning family-owned oldest newspaper in the South. Since Autumn is not afraid of anything, she's the perfect person to be Elizabeth's interlocutor. Elizabeth and Autumn will have a 45-minute conversation about, and then you'll be able to ask questions. So please turn off your phones right now, and let's go.
Hi. So we've spent much of the day together. Elizabeth came by the newsroom this morning, spent about an hour and a half with our reporters, and talked to us about her career and the process of writing this book and the process of being in this story for 4 years now.
Yeah.
So she leaves the newsroom, she comes here, sits down, and what do you know? This story does not stop. I don't know if anyone has the New York Times app on their phone, but if you did, about 15 minutes ago, you got a breaking news alert. So, if you were out upstairs having some wine and snacks, you might have seen her in the corner with her laptop writing that story. So, why don't we start with the breaking news?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, written just upstairs and sent to our wires in New York. Just about an hour and a half or 2 hours ago, a judge in the Sandy Hook, the defamation case that was brought by the families of 8 Sandy Hook victims in Connecticut, levied another $473 million damages judgment against Alex Jones. So, so this brings the total that the families have been awarded by juries in this country to $1.5 billion. So this is not money that Alex Jones has, but just to bring you up to speed for those who are saying, what are all these numbers and what's going on here? In mid-2018, the families of 10 Sandy Hook victims filed 4 separate defamation lawsuits against Alex Jones and his Infowars outlet based in Austin, Texas, for spreading lies for years that the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, which killed 20 first graders and 6 educators, was a plot and a hoax, and that it was a pretext by the federal government to impose draconian gun control. People who believed, he also spread the lie that the families were crisis actors complicit in this government plot, this false claim that he was making. And that ignited years of stalking, online abuse, death threats, and torment for these families, and a significant secondary trauma for those who had lost loved ones on that day. So they decided in mid-2018 that they had had enough of this, and more important, and this is really what the book is about, they decided that, and they could see, especially Lenny Posner, who is the father of the youngest Sandy Hook victim. He has a tech background. He could see how these lies were spreading on social media. He saw Sandy Hook and the hoax that spread as a foundational story of how disinformation and false narratives have gained traction in our society. And the book really traces that continuum from Sandy Hook to false claims circulating around most mass shootings, to Pizzagate, to the Great Replacement theory that ignited the violence in Charlottesville, to coronavirus lies, and then finally to the 2020 election conspiracy theories that brought an insurrection to the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Alex Jones played a role in all of these, as did millions of Americans who believe these lies. And it feels a little bit like, a rising tide of disinformation. The Sandy Hook families wanted to send that message to all of us, that this is happening, this is impacting not just vulnerable people like them, but it is starting to erode our democracy. And that's what this book is about.
So, we were talking a little bit this morning. You were not the reporter, the breaking news reporter in 2012. You were not covering this story until mid-2018 when the defamation suit was filed,
Right.
First one. And I always think of you as a politics reporter, not a court reporter. But you went to your editor and said, this is a story I want to do. Do you want to talk about why you felt like you were the right person to tell that story and why you thought it was an important story to tell?
Sure. So as I was saying in the Post and Courier newsroom today, I didn't know that I was the right person to tell it, but it definitely resonated with me. It felt like, in that moment in mid-2018 when the families filed these suits, the first ones, 2 of them, there were 4 total, since combined into 3, 2 of them filed in Texas. And I thought, this is going to be such an interesting test of the First Amendment, whether our right to free speech protects these kinds of viral falsehoods that travel around the world in minutes and impact people's lives severely, and yet those who spread them are seldom held to account. And so I went to my bureau chief and said, I just feel like this is a really symbolic story, and why don't I go down to Texas and talk with these lawyers and see what this is all about, and then reach the families and see, why they're doing this. And it kind of all unfolded from there.
Yeah. So hopefully everyone has read the book or is going to read the book. The way she set it up, the way you set it up, I just want to compliment the organization of it. So the first 3 chapters, she introduces you to the children. We know everything about their lives, the things they liked, their favorite colors. You see them on that morning before they go to school. You see the parents dropping off the kids, and then you see the shooting, you see the aftermath. And, I was reading that book aloud on a road trip, and I could only get really a page or 2 before I needed a break. It's very emotional. I'm sure it was very emotional to write. And 3 chapters in, you're so deeply invested in these families. And chapter 4, you introduce us to Alex Jones. And then, and this is the choice I want to ask you about, and then you start to introduce us to the trolls.
Right.
And this was something I hadn't really read before. You didn't just tell us about what they were doing what they were posting, you told us who they were, and you spent time with them.
Yeah.
I want to read so you understand the depth of, let's see, I wrote down a page number. I want to read this to you, and then I want to hear why you made that choice to really focus on these people and help us understand them.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the most shocking messages to Lenny, which one of the fathers, arrived from a woman with the online handle Great Mom. She wrote, "I want to hear the slaughter, and I won't be satisfied until the caskets are open, hopefully by Geraldo." Great Mom is Kelly Watt, who by mid-2014 had become a daily visitor to Lenny's page. He had a Facebook page. We can talk about that a little bit. A divorced mother of 2 children in her 30s and a grandmother of 2, Watt is a proprietor and sole employee of Made in the USA, a house cleaning business in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So you didn't let them be anonymous, and I think you did a great exploration of who they are and why they do what they do.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that, why
Sure.
you've shown that spotlight.
So Kelly Watt in particular, this is interesting. When I was first drafting the book, my partner, Paul, who is somewhere in the audience, I can't really see, but he was my sort of first editor of every chapter and of the book itself. Yeah. And I had written initially a kind of description that didn't even go that much further than that of Kelly Watt.
Yeah.
But he was like, I gotta know who this person is. And so I spent a lot of time with her. She came to sort of typify for me as I learned more and more and talked to more and more of these conspiracy theorists. There's a type and there's a motivation, and then there's something that they get out of this that has absolutely nothing to do with the facts of the case, which is why as you go through like this litany of conspiracy theories that we've been living with for the last decade, you see that the same people tend to embrace them. And Kelly had a lot of trauma in her background. In the 1990s, she embraced this theory that liberals in the Department of Education were, through the curriculum, indoctrinating Tulsa's public school children, not unlike the sort of critical race theory debate that's happening right now, that they're being taught bad values, that they're being taught to disobey their parents, et cetera, et cetera. Her family was imploding around her while she was pursuing this theory. She was showing up in the middle of the night at members of the school board's homes. She was organizing protests. She was standing up and speaking. She got into a confrontation with the principal at her daughter's school who called the police. She was absolutely convinced of this. And what was happening there was a couple things. One, the Tulsa newspaper shut her down. She was trying to run for the school board. She was trying to get publicity for these theories that she had. And the local paper had the power, and I think that's important to make this point, in the community at that time to say, no, she's not getting a platform. This is false. This is, provably nuts. This is not happening. Now she would be able to go to Facebook and to social media. And so years later, as I say, her family imploded, her husband lost his business, he struggled with alcoholism, her children had difficulties, but she became more and more singularly focused on this theory. So fast forward to Sandy Hook. So that all kind of went away. She got shut down, her daily life struggles kind of took over, and her piles of files on this theory sort of moldered away in her attic. That was sort of the end of it. But then fast forward to Sandy Hook, she sees this online, she embraces this theory, and she becomes a real contributor to the growing body of hoax theory around Sandy Hook online. She gets in contact with a group of academics. She writes a chapter in a book called Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, nice subtle title there. And suddenly, Kelly Watt, who described herself as a janitor with this difficult life, became a researcher, a citizen journalist, a person with a big following, somebody who was a contributor, who was a content creator for Alex Jones and Infowars with tens of millions of followers and listeners and an audience. So there is no way that someone like Kelly Watt is going to give up on this theory. I think she knows it's false. She will never admit that if you present her with facts. And at the core of her sort of contribution to this body of hoax was the idea that nobody cleaned up the school after the shooting. She and some of her compatriots issued FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to the school. They wanted to know who cleaned up, and they described in great detail, what was left in the school after this horrific shooting. And if you presented her with that evidence, the company that cleaned it up was a matter of public record. She'd just go somewhere else. And it was because she was getting a new identity out of this, a sense of self-esteem, and a body of friends that she never had before.
Right. As you're talking, I was reminded, she was part of a Facebook group of people who, kind of a closed network of people who are feeding each other new information.
Yeah.
Right? And Lenny, the father who really is the hero of your book, he decides he's going to go ahead and go on there and let them ask him questions.
Right.
And what happened?
So he chatted online with this Sandy Hook hoax Facebook group. Hundreds of people were members of this at this time. They would jump on and they would chat into the wee hours of the morning, sort of sharing and embroidering. And it was like a quilting bee in a weird way. Everybody was contributing to this body of falsehood around the plot. And she would go on there, and Lenny decided, I'm going to go on there with the facts. He had Noah's birth certificate, his death certificate, his post-mortem report, which was not easy reading, believe me, and his school records, and said, he had a little bit of backing in hoax theory, and he thought some conspiracy theories, the harmless ones, like nobody landed on the moon kind of thing, were entertaining. To him, conspiracy theories were like the Da Vinci Code. So he felt like he had a window into the mind of these hoaxers, as he calls them. And he tried to disprove what they were saying with facts. And that was when he learned what I was just telling all of you, that the sense of tribalism and identity and group cohesion that these people were getting, he was like a predator to them. They cast him out. I call them, a ragtag army defending themselves, inside this fortress, defending themselves against intrusions of truth. After they kicked him out, and I have the transcript of the whole chat from that night and describe it, and they're congratulating themselves and saying, I wish we were all together, we could tip a few together, this was great, what a jerk, they got rid of him. But at the same time, there were some people, and many of them were moms who had children who were the age of the Sandy Hook first graders, and they were approaching him kind of in side messages, and he had convinced them. And they were only there because they couldn't face, he called it a form of PTSD, they couldn't face the idea that this had happened. And so he started to contact them, and they became the core of a volunteer movement that he built called the Honor Network, where they fought to get this content taken down, and they were the nucleus of the battle to take down conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones.
So you said not easy reading.
Right.
You walk into this story. These families have been traumatized, frankly, by the media, by social media, just by the climate. And you're another reporter asking them to tell their stories again.
Yeah.
So how did you earn their trust? And how did you get them to tell their stories in a way? I mean, how does that work? How do you get somebody to tell a story that's traumatic without re-traumatizing them?
So it is interesting in that I think sometimes we transfer our own horror at what happened onto those families. So what I mean by that is, when I first talked with Lenny about it, I said, "Can you walk me through that day?" And he said, "How much do you want to hear?" And I just sort of had to say, I will hear whatever you want to tell me, whether it's nothing or everything. And I noticed that when people pick up this book, for example, many times people will say, well, some people, even some publishers, when we were looking for a publisher for the book, would say, I cannot even pick up this proposal. Because we were so traumatized as a nation by this shooting. But I make the point in the book that makes us all deniers in a way, because unless we're open to knowing what these people have gone through, we can't draw any lessons from it. And I think the families and I came to that understanding, which was, we're going to lay this all out for you, but don't give us your, "Oh, you're so strong," which is a way of saying, "Don't tell me anymore," or "I salute you, but now be quiet." They wanted you to know. And so I'm just so honored and so privileged to tell that story, because it holds that broader message for the rest of us. And I think that maybe was at the bedrock of the understanding that we had. But that said, they had been through a lot. Not everybody who reported on this story, they felt treated them fairly. There were mistakes made in the heat of the moment. This always happens in covering, these sudden events like this. The town of Newtown was very distrustful and difficult, and I don't mean difficult like as a criticism. I mean it was difficult to talk with them because they were traumatized as a community. So I think part of it was just persistence. I think part of it is that it's a book, not a news story, so you have time. And you also have time to go back to them and say, I want to walk through every sentence here and make sure that this is right. Because if this is going to be a book about truth, I have to pitch a perfect game here. So I need your help.
You said an interesting thing, you're so strong. I think about that sometimes, how we like to tie up a story like this in a bow.
Which is exactly how Robbie Parker put it. Don't tie up our story and put a nice bow on it, because it doesn't end. We don't move forward.
And then we can forgive ourselves from thinking about it anymore, because it was such a perfect little narrative.
And they've accused me of that. I mean, he was accusing me of that when he said that, because I was listening to him in a specific conversation, and he was saying, he said something like, I can tell, that, you're standing, he calls it the big chasm, you're standing on the side of the chasm where you're looking at the families and their horrible loss. You're not willing to come across and meet us and sit with us in all of that.
What point in the reporting did he say that to you?
That was probably midway through. And he was talking about a moment in a conversation, but he was saying that's the thing. And I said to him, I've been sort of saying that, haven't I? I've been kind of saying I don't know where you get your strength, which you admire that, and that's true, but it's also a way of ending a conversation rather than being open to the rest.
Not letting them talk about their struggles. That's true. So one thing we were talking about this morning was, how do you tell a story like this for years in the New York Times, in a book, without turning into a megaphone for Alex Jones or the others?
It's a great question, and it's one that I not only struggle with as a writer, but
Yeah.
we've struggled with at the Times in telling these stories. And, Alex Jones is an adjudicated liar. One thing I didn't say in my introductory comments was, he so stonewalled these lawsuits that there was never the opportunity for him to try and prove in a court that free speech protected him, that the First Amendment protects, it doesn't, as the lawyers in Texas put it, speech is free, lies you pay for. He knew these were lies. And so the families were going to make him pay. But he never got there because he refused to submit financial records and testimony and documents that were being ordered by the courts. So at the end of last year, the courts ruled him liable by default in all of these cases. So it meant that he lost all of them. And so then they went to the damages phase where the juries were instructed simply to decide how much he must pay. And that's where we are. That's what today's news was about. So, those were the jury trials. So it wasn't to say whether he was right or wrong. He was already done in that regard. But where were we?
Oh, I was saying, how do
Sorry.
you keep from giving him a megaphone?
Yeah,
even
okay,
as you're
sorry.
discussing the story?
Yeah, so he's an adjudicated liar. We know this. So where do you put your focus? And he was so keen, you may have seen, he was on the courthouse steps giving news conferences. He really wanted to use these trials and has, by the way, donations and sales on his Infowars website have all gone up in the aftermath of this. People think they're defending him because he's saying the deep state is out to silence him, and there are enough people who believe this that they're supporting him now more than ever. So you don't want to feed into that. So we just relentlessly focused on the families, on their testimony, on the impact. And there was one particular moment where that kind of all gelled for me in covering the Connecticut trial, and that's that Jones is out on the courthouse steps bloviating. The families are assembling inside to begin their testimony after the lunch break. He would cleverly set his press conferences outside. He was refusing to come into court, by the way. He would not face them. He would not be in the gallery while they told their stories of what they'd endured for all these years. And so he was trying to run out the clock on the courthouse steps. And I was just faced with this moment where I was like, I'm listening to him. There's no news there. He's not talking about his strategy. He's not saying he's sorry. He's not acknowledging anything. He's just, pushing his line. And I was like, well, we're about to start. So if you stayed out there, you would actually miss the testimony. And there's the choice, right? And that was the last time I followed one of his courthouse steps impromptu news conferences, because I was like, no. You can't be bothered to be in there. You have such disregard for the judicial system. You've shown all that. You're not interested in truth or in justice or in defending yourself. You're really just pushing a line and selling your goods. Right. So my place is inside the courtroom. And that was kind of overall what we decided. Just relentless focus on the impact of his lies rather than on the man himself. Although in the book, I need to tell you who he is, so I profile him.
Right. So I didn't get a chance to watch the trials. So there was never a moment where he was confronted with the parent's story, or really was he able to?
So in Texas, there was.
Okay.
So Connecticut's gotten a lot of attention because it's the families of 8 victims. But Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis, who are central characters in the book, they got their trial first, and that was in Austin. And the reason that Alex Jones was avoiding the Connecticut courtroom as much as he was because in Austin, and that was this summer, Scarlett Lewis, there was an accident of timing. So Jones knew that he was going to be testifying in the afternoon for the first time. So he timed his appearance for when he was going to be on stage, because that's him. But Scarlett Lewis did her testimony in the morning, but she wasn't finished by the lunch break. So he comes rolling up in his motorcade with his bodyguards, spewing insults at, the mainstream media on his way into the courthouse, and sits down at the witness table, lawyer here, and up in the stand is Scarlett Lewis. And so for 90 minutes, The lawyers questioned her, and she directed every answer at him. So she was like, I am a mother. My son was real. Truth is important to our society. Truth is the bedrock of our democracy, and you are eroding that. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But she was saying, it's so important. And she said, we are now more polarized than ever as a nation, and you bear some responsibility. He was sweating through his shirt. Yeah. He was squirming. He was looking away. He was looking at his lawyers for help. They were looking at her. Everybody was looking at her. I have to say, it was one of the most powerful episodes I think I've ever witnessed. She was using her power as a survivor, as the mother of a child who had been killed in this tragedy, to tell him, this is what you're doing, not only to me, but to society with what you're up to here. And it was powerful. It was extraordinary.
So there was never a moment when he appeared to be sorry?
No. Yeah. He's sorry about the trouble he's in.
Yeah.
He's sorry he got caught.
Yeah.
Sorry, I bet he's really sorry about this $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
But no, he's a doubler downer.
Yeah.
So yeah, and after the big judgment, the $965 million last month, he only doubled down. He said, now I'll be questioning every mass shooting. Now you see it's complete. They're trying to destroy me. And unfortunately, there are a number of people who believe him.
Right. So, last night I talked to a group of high school kids about your book and asked them what I should ask you. And then today in the newsroom, reporters were asking you questions, and they both were kind of asking the same questions. They were both the kids and who are really the age, if those kids had gotten the chance in Sandy Hook to grow up. They were all worried about you.
Oh.
And
actually, I'm going to fill up now.
No, but they were worried about, it's a lot to take on to do this story. Yeah. So how have you taken care of yourself, or how have you processed those emotions, or how have you kept that anger out of your writing or used it?
Well, I'm obviously starting to process those emotions just sitting up here, I think. I always was thinking, given what the families have endured and, not only that what they lost, but what they lost when, so many of their fellow Americans called them liars and frauds and said they planned their own children's deaths.
Right.
Anything I was feeling was sort of paling in comparison. But I have to say, I don't want to sound, I don't want this to come out wrong, but I felt like it was such a privilege and such an honor to tell their story. And I was so blown away by their patience, by their determination, by their commitment to drawing a positive message, a sort of warning to the rest of us from their own experience, that I just didn't think about it that much. And I always felt like, and they're so hopeful, they are really hopeful that all of you will pick up what they're saying and question these narratives and think about what this is doing to our society. And if they're hopeful, how could I not be hopeful?
Yeah.
So I just, it's hard to sit with, but it's also an incredible privilege, and I feel like it's a responsibility.
Yeah. Changing the subject a little bit. I don't know if this will play to the way it did in the newsroom, but we had a conversation this morning about the Newtown Bee and the way the government reporter who was on scene responded. And, as the Post and Courier, we've had traumatic events here to cover some. Anyway, I just wanted to hear a little bit from you as you started to go back in time and autopsy, how the media dealt with that day.
Yeah.
What's the role of, the media, and what's the role of the reader in those breaking news moments?
So first I want to just give a shout out to the Post and Courier and the staff. I mean, they had such amazing questions that I was sitting there thinking, this is a paper that has been in this country in its various iterations since 1803, and still, you know, asking the questions and covering and, you know, and showing this, like, you could feel like that sense of, you know, the community, like that sort of, you know, it's our job and our responsibility to be not only reporting what happens in the community, but to be a part of the community. And that was just like, I kind of like had this like feeling of like, what did this crowd look like going all the way back to 1803? Well, there wouldn't have been any women there, but it still was pretty cool. So anyway, so rooted in that was, you know, the Newtown Bee, very old paper covering Newtown since the, you know, early 19th century and maybe even the end of the 18th. And there was a reporter there who was in the firehouse as the families were receiving this news. No media was allowed, but he was so much of the community that nobody thought to ask him to leave. And he did not report one word of what he saw or heard that day. And so it was, you know, we had this reflection in the newsroom today about, was he doing his job as a reporter, or was he, you know, or was he not? And I think, you know, that's the sort of conundrum that reporters face when they go into a charged, traumatic, horrific situation like this. The public needs to know, but how do you present that information in a way that doesn't add to the destruction of the day? And there are no easy answers to that. And, you know, his answer at that time was, I'm not going to report any of this, even though he had the exclusive of his lifetime. There were no other media. The place was crawling with reporters, and he was the only soul in the media who was in that room. But out of respect, he didn't do it. He didn't publish. So, it's just something to think about.
I don't know if he did the right thing or not.
Right.
That, like you said, maybe he couldn't have written that story at all. I mean, he was too close to it. So I think it was in Sunday's New York Times, a breakdown, you know, this is Sandy Hook, this happened, 2012 and in the aftermath, but it's not a unique story. The New York Times focused on the Paul Pelosi story, right? And it had a breakdown of, so this horrific thing happens, right? Attacked in his home. He has a, horrible skull fracture. And almost immediately, there was this really interesting chart showing how almost immediately, as we were digesting the news, voices start coming out saying, maybe it didn't happen. And then not just that, but then like Elon Musk amplifying that, right? So the people that are spinning up the theory and then the people that are amplifying it. In your book, you talk a lot about how there are different things that motivate conspiracy theories. One was, like you said, the Kelly Watt, the social status that weirdly you get out of being in these communities. But what else? What is it that makes this now almost we expect it?
So I think it's both hopeful and discouraging to think about this, not in terms of, because I started out this way, I can't believe these people think this, I can't believe they believe this. And there are people who believe this, but whatever the theory is, name your theory. 20% of Americans right now believe that any high-profile mass shooting was staged by the government. Anyone. So, and that's been borne out in study after study. That was not true a decade ago after Sandy Hook, but it's true now. And the reason is that people like, certain political players or Alex Jones, who sells products adjacent to these broadcasts and knows that they grab people's attention, they use this material and they use the people who believe it to their own ends. So as Steve Bannon, advisor to the last president, put it, and I'm sorry, I know I should be polite, I'm in Charleston, but I'm going to swear here. He calls it, flooding the zone with shit. If you flood social media with guano and you get enough people believing it or spreading it, and you get enough people trying to debunk it or argue against it, you have changed the entire conversation. So while in the Pelosi thing, we are talking about political violence, but all of a sudden we're not. We're talking about, was the window broken from the inside or the outside? Right. Who was the guy? Did he know Pelosi? Was there some kind of relationship there? All of a sudden, the zone is flooded with shit, and we're all arguing about this. And you have that whole roster of political players who all know better, who are spreading this. And why are they doing it? Not because they believe it, because they want to get the rest of us distracted. And that's what's going on there. So it's sort of, once you know that this isn't just that the whole country's gone mad, there's a purpose here and a goal and a method. And I think that's important to bear in mind. And I do feel like the dawning realization of that we could sort of see in some of the results of the midterm elections.
Yeah. A lot of this happened and was perpetuated on Facebook, on social media platforms. And Lenny made it his mission to call them out over and over and over and over again. You want to talk a little bit about what he did? He used copyright and what's been effective and where we sort of are now with social media platforms?
Yeah, so his biggest hurdle was the fact that the social media platforms, Facebook, Google, which owns YouTube, Twitter to a lesser degree, they act with impunity in these matters. They don't do anything to take down this content. They're getting a little better, partly because of him. He's pushed them. But they're protected by the law. They're treated as the conduit through which these falsehoods travel, rather than the responsible party. So they're not liable under our libel laws, and they, unless shamed, don't take the material down. And he made it his business to shame them. He also used the one legal tool at his disposal, which is the copyright law. So these hoaxers were stealing family photos, family videos, and things from the family's own social media pages and using them in their hoax videos and on their own websites and things. That's illegal. That actually is illegal, and the platforms would invariably take that down. So that became a primary tool in his toolkit. But the other thing was, in writing op-eds in papers like yours, where, he would call out Mark Zuckerberg, here's an open letter to the founder of Facebook. How can it be that you are actually affording, a platform to neo-Nazis and mass shooting deniers in the name of free speech? That's not how the First Amendment works. And that worked. He's now like a trusted flagger for all of these social media platforms. So he got this content taken down by the thousands.
Yeah.
So it's really a triumphant story.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll turn it to the audience. So 4 years of covering this story, and it's not over. What's next for you? Are you going to stay on this beat? Are you writing another book?
So I have to eventually get back to, I don't know what my day job was before, because I was sort of new in my feature writing job at the times when I started working on this. So, you know, because I'm a feature writer, I'm kind of doing a little of this and a little of that. We have another presidential election coming up. There'll be a lot to write. I'm based in Washington, D.C., so there'll be a lot to do. But these cases are also not over in two ways. One, there's one more damages trial, and that one, ironically, is Lenny's trial. So it's in Austin. It'll be the third of three. And so it's the sort of coup de grace for him. It's ironic that he's last in line because he got this whole ball rolling. But so I will definitely be there for every minute of that trial. But it's also not over in that there are many, many more episodes of disinformation and the impact on individuals to cover. So that's kind of where I'll be spending my time.
All right, where is the microphone?
It's amazing the job that you've done. Thank you so much. But you said that it hasn't happened before 20 years. And it hits me that the velocity of news is the thing that has changed, the velocity of information. Because I used to stand in the supermarket line and read newspapers that said that, you know, a mother ate her two-headed child.
Right.
And that was the same, right?
We miss that weekly world news, don't we?
And
those were the days I feel downright nostalgic for the Bat Baby.
Yeah, exactly. And on September 11th, I heard that Bush took down 7 World Trade Center. Right. And there's lots of news on that. You can watch videos on it, and it's in complete insanity. And the last thing was also that the reporters on September 11th, I did not see a single mainline news source show a picture of a person landing. So I think it was the same thing as what your example was. There were pictures, but no mainline source printed a picture of that because it was respect out of the same thing. So I feel like we haven't learned anything in 20 years. And, you know, has it really changed? And how do we slow the velocity of this garbage? Because I long for the day of the newspaper in the newspaper line, but I don't know how we put this genie back in the bottle. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that is, we could have a whole another hour on that.
We're gonna fix this.
Yeah, I wish we could fix this, all of us sitting right here. I mean, the fact that we are talking about it, the fact that it's being recognized as a political weapon, as an economic weapon by someone like Alex Jones, is part of the battle. There's a lot of research going on. I was mentioning today at the Post and Courier that there's a whole body of researchers who are looking at the political uses of disinformation, conspiracy theory, and the psychological reasons that people, moreover, sociological reasons that people embrace these theories. And there are some answers for, you know, kind of conditioning people not to be susceptible to these, that's coming out of that. On the policy front, I do think Congress has a rare moment of bipartisan agreement in that they realize that something needs to be done about the speed and the volume of which this material travels on social media. So that is something that people are grappling with now. So there are efforts afoot, and, you know, again, this, you know, the families telling their story in this way was meant to be a contribution to that discussion, and a kind of, you know, kind of a drop kick to policymakers and the social media platforms and the rest to start working on a solution, because this is out of control.
Yes.
Thank you. You said that your book has benefited Alex Jones' business. Was there ever
Oh, no, I said the trials,
the trials
his
and-
sort of portrayal of, yeah.
So, but in that vein, did you ever have a private moment where you faced the issue, is this morally right for me to tell this story that will result in a lot more press for him and perpetuate even more of this false news? Did you ever question whether or not morally this was right? We've had a number of sessions this week where some of the work has posed moral dilemmas. Did you ever face that at all? Did you think about it?
I definitely, as I said earlier, struggled with the idea of how much, what percentage airtime, if you look at a book as a kind of program, what percentage of that goes to Alex Jones and his story? And, you would see in the book, not very much. But first of all, given the amount of material that's out there, given the amount, where most people get their news and get their information, it's not from books. I wish it was. It's not. This is literally a drop in an ocean of coverage about this phenomenon, certainly, but also about Sandy Hook and the lies that were spread. But at the same time, the book is revelatory in that it draws the connection between what was happening and raises the issue that this was not a one-off. This isn't just one guy. This is, something that's happening in our culture and really needs to be documented. So in that sense, no, I don't want to be self-righteous about it, certainly, and I'm not. But I felt like what I was doing was saying, without drawing undue attention to the individual, this is something that we need to wrestle with and defeat as a society because it's bringing us down collectively. And so that was the message. It was not to, and I've seen coverage that's done it, and the families themselves have come down hard on some media that have done this, that puts him center stage. The book is not called Alex Jones, it's called Sandy Hook. It's about what these people have endured and as a result of this phenomenon in our culture. Sure.
Who else?
I don't have a question, I have a story, which the people here might find interesting. I was an internist, now retired, in New Canaan, Connecticut, which is 20 minutes from Newtown.
Right.
And we had patients in Newtown and all the surrounding communities. And we all in the office watched in horror that day because it was on TV as it was happening. And so there was a tremendous ripple effect that isn't talked about much. In the closer you were to that community, the more you were affected. We talked about it long after the rest of the country thought about other things. So my story is, a week after the shooting, an elderly woman who was a patient of mine for many years walked into the office totally distraught, sobbing. We put her in the back room, and the story was her granddaughter was one of the victims. 2 weeks after that, a man in his 40s came in, also suffering from anxiety and depression and stress. His nephew was one of the victims. A month later, a paramedic who was a patient of mine came to see me, clearly starting to suffer from signs and symptoms of PTSD. And at the end of my time with him, I said, he had gone into the school. He was one of the paramedics that went into the school before the bodies were removed. And the last thing I said to him was, can you describe what you saw? And he looked at me and he said, Doc, I can't. I've spent the last month trying to get what I saw to get out of my brain. That's my story.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have questions? How much more time do we have? 5 minutes.
Do you favor elimination of the immunity that internet platforms have so that they will be held responsible, just like the New York Times or the Post and Courier are held responsible?
It's, you know, when I started out on the book, I thought, yes, that needs to be, that Section 230 is what it's called, that needs to be, you know, removed from the Telecommunications Act. But it's a little bit more tricky because it has to do with, and we don't have time to go into it here, but it has to do with it was meant to foster the development of the internet. And so there are some unintended consequences of eliminating that altogether. But there's some work on some sort of elegant solutions. And one of them is very much tailored on libel law, and that's that if you spread this material, meaning if you continue to host it on your platform, and you run advertising adjacent to it, because this is how these platforms make money, and you push it to, you know, people through your algorithms, then you are liable the same way we would be liable. I think that's a more elegant solution because it gets not just to the free speech issue or the, you know, the fostering of an open and viable and vibrant internet, but it gets to the core of why this is so objectionable, and it's that these companies use algorithms. So if you are a conspiracy theorist, the algorithms will drive an endless amount of content in that vein to you, so that you will live on a steady diet of that. If they do that, and that's provably false, and they know it, then they should pay for that. So, and they do that to make money, to keep you online as much as possible. So if they, through their business model, spread this material, yes, they could be liable. That's one solution that's being looked at.
Okay, I tell you what, this is going to have to be our last question.
I'm wondering if you found along the way any resources for young adults and tweens that those of us who interact with those communities can use to help them to understand this misinformation and how dangerous it is to believe everything that you see on Twitter or TikTok or all those different outlets.
That's a great question, thank you. Yes, there is work being done to try and dissuade people from embracing these theories before they encounter them. It's on inoculation theory. This work is being done at Cambridge, and I describe it in the book. Teaching people, literally through an online game, how to create a conspiracy theory, how to target an other group, because there's always a target, you know, there's some out group that you're targeting. How do you choose that? How do you make it spread? How do you make it go viral? And people are actually asked to design this. And the goal here is that when they encounter this material, they suddenly know how the sausage is made, and they are provably, through this research, more likely to report that material and less likely to spread it, either retweet it or share it in some way. It's kind of, you know, it is a way of like teaching people, young people in particular, through a game, how to identify this content and know that they're sort of being had when they come across it. And for older people who are conspiracy-minded, they sort of thrive on that, you know, I'm the possessor of superior information. So it sort of, you know, plays on that too, like, we're gonna show you how this is done so that when you encounter it in the wild, you'll be like, oh, aha, I know what that is. So that's one of the breakthroughs that's been made in trying to get people, because that's easier. Once people build their whole psyche around a conspiracy theory, it's really hard to dislodge that. But if you can teach them, you know, or how, you know, help them understand how it's done before they, you know, encounter this, then it's a lot. It goes a lot better. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Autumn. That was amazing.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Elizabeth Williamson is going to be signing her book out in the lobby, and you can buy books from Buxton Books and get Elizabeth to personalize them. Thank you for coming.